Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Pinniped Community Meeting. Today's date is July 1st, 2021. If you're tuning in from home, we would invite you to come and join us live. We meet every first and third Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. If you aren't able to join us and you would like to interact with the maintainers, you can find us on the Kubernetes Slack workspace in the Pinniped channel. When you do attend these meetings, we do ask that you read and abide by our code of conduct, which can be found at the top of this agenda. For those of you that are joining us today live, if you have anything you wish to bring up with the team, please add that down here in the discussion topics area. Also, we ask that you add your name and any company or organization that you're representing when you're attending these meetings so that we can keep track of who's attending and keep those lines of communication open so that we can reach out after the meeting and continue to support the community. As far as announcements go today, it looks like we don't have any announcements in particular, so we'll move on to status updates. And there's some changes and updates, particularly with the project roadmap. I know that there's a couple of items here that were projected to be released in June 2021, but has been updated to July 2021. Matt, do you want to go over?
Yeah, do you want to click through to the roadmap and maybe refresh because we did just update this.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are working right now on what we call remote OIDC login support. So this is being able to log in to the supervisor on machines that don't have a web browser. So like if I'm SSH to a jump host and I want to run kubectl there, I still have a browser, but it's not on the same place. Anyway, that work is in progress. I've been working on that this last couple of weeks. It should be ready soon. And the other feature which Mark has been working on is specific support for Active Directory as an identity provider in the supervisor. So this is basically an extension of our LDAP support with actually fewer options because you sort of don't need as many options to connect to LDAP. We can make a lot of assumptions about defaults. And then there's a few things where we're going to actually tweak the behavior of the login flow to be more sort of Active Directory native. Small things like parsing fields that we know are in a particular format. The other feature here that we have scheduled for sort of July is support for more types of clusters in the concierge. So there's a couple of gaps right now that we know of, like OpenShift doesn't work with the concierge right now. We're going to make that work. There might be other things in this category. I think it's a little open-ended because we want to make sure that we cover kind of the widest range of clusters we can so that it just works out of the box for the most people that it can. We have multiple IDP support sort of next up on the priority list here. This is basically support for having a supervisor with several IDPs configured concurrently. So I can allow users to log in through LDAP or Active Directory or OIDC or another OIDC provider and have all of those available. And there's a little bit of design left to do on this one about how this is exposed to the user. Like, is it only exposed when you generate a kubeconfig, or is it also exposed to the end user? Some questions there, but this is one of those features that I think people would probably expect works already, and it doesn't. So we're gonna make it work with as few surprises as possible. The next one up there, we didn't have this filed as an issue until this morning, but it's something we had talked about as a team a bunch. And this is the idea that when you take identities from the upstream identity provider and you map them into your Kubernetes clusters, currently everything is just one-to-one. So a user named Matt in the upstream becomes a user named Matt in Kubernetes, and your group named, Pinniped team becomes a group named Pinniped team downstream. So this feature is about supporting more complex transformations. So maybe I want to add a prefix to all my usernames that came from a particular IDP. And so I can say like, LDAP : Matt is my username when it actually shows up in Kubernetes. Or I might want to apply other kinds of filtering. So I might want to say like, oh, my upstream IDP has 10,000 groups, but I'm not going to use all of those groups in Kubernetes RBAC. So I only want to ever support like these 5 groups that I know are relevant to my policies. And so at the supervisor level, we'll just do that filtering, and the tokens that you get out in Kubernetes will only ever have like a subset of groups. And then the same feature, we think if we design the API correctly, could also be useful for coarse-grained authorization. So I could say like, hey, I've got this big corporate directory. I've got, tens of thousands of employees, and I have this Kubernetes cluster that I know is for my team. I don't ever want anyone else in the directory to be able to log into this. And the other scenario that's like that, that's even worse, is I've got github.com with, I don't know how many users, millions of users. I don't want most of those people to ever touch my cluster. I only want people on my team in my org to touch my cluster. And so you can do that today with RBAC, but sort of you need to be able to audit your RBAC policy and make sure nobody else's usernames end up anywhere. So we could, at the supervisor level, support a coarse-grained check and say, if you aren't in a particular group, you can't even authenticate. You can't even log into the cluster. Anyway, that's that feature. The next feature, extended IDP support, is another one that I think we have been talking about for a while, and it's like we just assumed that it's on the roadmap, but it actually wasn't on the roadmap. And this is support for additional types of IDPs of the supervisor. The 2 that we have filed specifically are GitHub and Google. And so GitHub today doesn't work at all because GitHub is a OAuth provider, but just triggered my phone. They are an OAuth provider, but they're not an OIDC provider. So they don't issue an ID token. And so it doesn't work with our OIDC support. To make it work, we basically just need to add support for specifically the protocol that GitHub uses and how they expose user identity. Google does work today. You can make it work, but you won't get group support because Google never puts the groups in the ID token. There's no way to configure it. If you want groups, you have to make a special API call that's Google specific. So we'll add like a Google identity provider that makes that API call. Anyway, if folks have other ideas for specific IDPs that aren't supported by OIDC or LDAP, that are in wide use, like file issues, I think that the big one that we're not committing to is SAML, or we probably are not committing to. There are a bunch of SAML identity providers, but most of them also support OIDC, and SAML has a lot of complexity that would love to steer around. Anyway, that's it. And then the rest of the roadmap is unchanged. So that was kind of a long update. Do folks have questions?
Thank you for that, Matt. It's very thorough and I'm sure very helpful for those that are watching from home to know what the team is up to. A couple of things I had put on here from the previous meeting, just to see if there was any updates on it. We had talked about design for non-interactive LDAP logins. Is there anything about any update to this after we had discussed this in the previous meeting?
I think that linked issue has been updated to reflect the discussion we had last time. So GitHub is not really great about showing the edit history, but the body of the acceptance criteria on the top there has shrunk. It's a lot simpler than it was before. We essentially decided that we're just going to pick those environment variable names. So it's going to be a Pinniped username, Pinniped password. And if you set those, so if you're trying to log into an LDAP identity provider and those environment variables are set, we will use them instead of prompting. It's like the simplest possible way to do this, and we decided that it was sufficient for now. So this is, yeah, that issue is sort of on our backlog and scheduled to be worked on soon.
Okay. And the other one was logout command support.
I don't think we have any updates on this.
Okay.
I think we all agreed it's a good idea, but we didn't have any other progress.
Okay. And were you or someone typing demo of jump
Yeah.
post
Yeah, let me I can show a demo.
Okay.
Since we're pretty good on time today. Let me pull up the thing I need. Sorry. Okay, I've got everything I need. Let me share this and this. So this is the flow that's in a open work in progress PR right now. It switches our, makes it actually a pretty minor adjustment to our login flow, but supports this case where the browser doesn't open on the same host where your CLI is running. And it also adds kind of like some new UI elements during the login flow that I think are slightly nicer. So if I run the login command here, you can see before it would have just printed out the URL if I passed in skip browser. Now it prints out the URL and asks me if I want to paste my authorization code directly in the window. And so if I don't do that, if I just click on the URL, I get logged in and everything finishes automatically. So that part of the flow is kind of the same as it was before. This UI that you see here is slightly different. There's like some styling and it's not just plain text anymore. It's also served on the supervisor. So you don't get redirected to localhost anymore. There's still like a network request that happens to localhost, but it's invisible behind the scenes in the background. Now you sort of see like your supervisor endpoint. And then similarly, if I do the same thing again, but I'm going to simulate being on a jump host here by just terminating that, so it's not listening. If I do the login again, it automatically falls back to this manual flow where I click the button to copy my auth code, and then I can paste that in and finish the login. And that can happen even if those two pieces aren't on the same machine. So one of them could be like on an SSH jump host, the other one could be on my desktop. Anyway, this is all going to be done this week. I really hope. It's got tests and stuff. And yeah, I just wanted to show that off. If anybody has comments or feedback, it's not too late to change things. So we still need to pick, oh, by the way, one thing we could definitely bike shed about is which emojis are the best emojis to use for the success in the manual case in the favicon. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Were there any comments or anything that anyone wants to share regarding that demo?
That was awesome. That'll be huge to have for sure. And also just one question regarding the Pinniped username, Pinniped password for the non-interactive login. We had talked on Slack this week about last week or this week about the user grant or password grant. Would it be the same user experience when that gets implemented if it does?
Yeah, I think so. There might also be some other marker in your kube config that says that your IDP supports a password grant. something like that. There might be a
Okay.
little bit of extra discovery that happens, but it should be essentially the same experience. And I don't know if you saw it, Scott, but there, Ryan did file an issue. I think
Yeah, I
he
saw.
mentioned about that login flow. I think we're still trying to figure out. So this is the issue. We have these two working theories of how service-to-service auth can work with OIDC. One is that you have service accounts registered as users, and you use password grant, and we know that's a valid deployment. People have this. There's another scenario where you have service accounts represented by clients, and they do client credentials grant. And usually you wouldn't get an ID token from that, but I think in some IDPs you can, or you get an access token that has some structure. I don't know. We're trying to figure out whether it makes sense to support just one or support both of them. When it's pretty early. Like I think we need to make sure that we understand how this stuff is deployed in practice at at scale. We need some data points basically, and we have yours, which is great.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's also, as we talked about on Slack, it's not the most secure method as well. But yeah, no, I've seen it by a lot of people with Azure AD that they use it that way through Dex, because Dex does support using the password grant for OIDC provider. Well, it supports it on anything, and then it just doesn't work on ones that don't support the possibility, and it falls terribly. Terribly. It just errors out and throws out a huge error on your screen. But yeah.
Another feature that is in the same category that I don't think we have this one written down yet, is the idea that we could have service accounts at the supervisor. So sort of like Pinniped native service account objects that represent like some kind of client, like a CI/CD Jenkins job or something that can log into the supervisor with that identity, and that could be like a token or something, and get access to some subset of clusters that way. I don't know, very vague, hand wavy, but so there are other systems, not Dex, but there are other systems that have this similar kind of capability of having, because Kubernetes has service accounts that exist locally to each cluster. This would be like a service account that exists across the federation domain, essentially.
So basically like local Pinniped users within the supervisor?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like Dex has with the local, Dex does have a local store that you pass in like a config file, like static users for Kubernetes, where you can just pass basically a config file with your username and password in plain text to Dex, and then it gets saved there.
Yeah, although there's maybe a distinction. We might branch off and have like one set of APIs that are meant for service to service auth like this, and then another set of APIs that are meant for local human user auth. Because this has been another discussion topic that maybe is good for the future, is like does it make sense to have like a local user store in Pinniped, either at the supervisor level or at the concierge level locally, because you often want this kind of thing for like break class access. Like if my IDP is broken, I still want to log in and fix my clusters.
Right.
Anyway,
yeah.
It's tricky because we don't want to like reduce security, basically.
Exactly. No, makes complete sense. Also, one other question, just that I know that there was an issue. I think Michael Nelson from the CubeApps team had filed a while ago. I've been using Pinniped with CubeApps a lot, and was wondering if there was the idea of, is it planned to be able to add clients to the supervisor to allow it to authenticate to applications running within Kubernetes? Like to add redirect URLs to CubeApps, for example, to be able to utilize that?
That's a good question. We are also interested in that use case. There's lots of things adjacent to Kubernetes that are web applications that you might want to authenticate with the same set of users that need to access kubectl. So like the other things in that category that we've thought of are things like monitoring dashboards like Prometheus or Grafana, CI/CD dashboards, Kubernetes dashboards, things like that. The tricky thing is just how to secure the client registration appropriately, and then also whether clients get registered at the, assuming you have sort of a multiple cluster setup where you have the supervisor installed on a management cluster, and then you have maybe several workload clusters that are running just the concierge. Where do the clients get registered? And if they get registered sort of locally on their local cluster, how does that registration get communicated up to the supervisor? There's just a bunch of design questions about exactly how it would work. I think it will be a very complex thing to tackle, but it's worth it because it's going to be a big win. So the answer to your question, I think, is yes. We think this is in scope for Pinniped, but we're really not sure how it's going to work yet.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, no, I'm looking at it also from that idea of the management cluster with workload clusters for login to multiple clusters for multi-cluster solutions, whether that would be something like Grafana or things like CubeApps or whatnot, which can target multi-clusters, which then becomes nice, but definitely not an easy one to tackle. So
yeah. And another thing that's complex that I don't know if we'll try to somehow work around is one thing that's nice about the design right now at Pinniped is that you only have to worry about ingress and certificates at the supervisor. The workload clusters don't need to have your browser never needs to hit the workload cluster. So you don't have to worry about getting valid certificates and getting routing and ingress set up. It would be nice if that property continued to be true, even if you're using, this new web app auth, web app clients. But it means that, I don't know, it's tricky. It's tricky to design because the most, maybe the easiest way to design it would be that we just have a component that sits in the workload cluster that acts as a federated gateway, but then that component needs to be able to load in your browser, which means it needs to have certs and ingress and a URL and all that. So anyway, I think it's probably time to start thinking about the design for this pretty soon and starting to collect use cases. So I don't think we have an issue file for this. That would be a good action item, is to file an issue and start collecting use cases.
yeah, I know there is one that Michael Nelson opened up a while ago, specifically regarding CubeApps, I think, or he mentioned CubeApps in there. I can try and find it.
Oh, you're right. There is. It's 577. Yeah. Okay. This would be a good place to start collecting these.
Yeah, I think it'll be especially helpful once the multi-IDP support comes in, because certain tools don't support multiple IDPs, and having it that way kind of allows you to have multiple IDPs to things that don't support it currently.
I think one goal for this is that it should be really easy to set up applications that share the same authentication as your cluster that they're running on. So as much as we can automate it, another thing I think we considered is integrating with something like Contour, so to have a authentication gateway basically integrated. So all I have to do if I want Pinniped auth in front of my web dashboard is add an annotation to my ingress and say I want Pinniped auth on this, and Contour would come in and register the right client for you and map and do all the exchange at the gateway level, so that your requests just come to your app and they're authenticated and you have the user ID or something.
Which may actually be easier than doing it with the applications themselves, doing it through something like Contour, because that can just solve anything that's done through that ingress.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, it might be nice to have both options, but one of the
Right.
trickiest parts about all of this is that you've got to generate your client secret, but to generate your client secret, oftentimes you need to know the redirect URI, which means you need to have the app deployed, and then you have to take this client secret and wire it back into the app config, and it's just a big mess of like configuration that you have to do. And we would like that to all be as like a declarative as possible, so that all you do is just say like, I want this thing to be authenticated, and it just all happens. But
yeah, all right, makes sense. Thanks for all of the details.
Yeah,
this was great.
Cool. Anything else that anyone wants to bring up before we part ways? Going once? Right. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for this lovely, short and sweet Pinniped community meeting. Thank you, Scott, for the discussion topics. Helpful as always. Really appreciate your input there. If you're, tuning in from home, again, we invite you to join us live. We meet every first and third Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And we also can be found on the Kubernetes Slack workspace in the Pinniped channel. So we hope to hear from you and value your input and feedback on any of the items that the team is working on. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you. Bye.